Hi, I'm Alina Chen at the 2017 Canadian Science Policy Conference. I have here with me Kei Koizumi. He's a visiting scholar at the AAAS and he worked for the White House for 8 years in the Obama administration. Kei, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us more about your work?
Well, I am here because I've been a scholar in science policy for a long time, but I've also been a science policy practitioner. So I've worked in a nonprofit organization, AAAS, and the U.S. government doing science policy, both policy for science funding and also trying to incorporate science advice into government decision making.
So I've got some really crucial questions for you today.
All right.
The first one is, how can governments build science advisory teams that have significant influence over decision making? And who would be on this ideal science dream team?
Well, I think a science advice dream team has a couple of ingredients. I mean, you start first with great scientists, and they have to have the right tools to be successful. And for me, the right tools based on experience are, number one, access to the leaders, such as a prime minister or cabinet ministers. Two is credibility in the science community, because it's that credibility that will enable a science advisor to call anyone in the nation and say, I need information on your discipline right away by tomorrow. And three, you need to have the willingness to translate between policy language and scientific language, because in many ways they are two different languages, and it requires some skills to translate between those. But if you have those three ingredients, then scientists working together in a team can provide some very useful scientific advice to policymakers.
I see. So how can they have real influence over decision making?
Well, influence of scientific advice is really not under anyone's control on the science side. It's actually up to the policymakers, and that's why that first ingredient of access is so important. You have to have not only the ear of the decision maker, but they have to be listening, and they have to want that information. But when those ingredients come together right, then you have the real opportunity to make sure that scientific information is at the table every time decisions are made in government.
I see. So this has come up several times at the conference about bilateral science advisory teams. Is there good crosstalk between US and Canadian science advisory teams? And has this influenced any policy making that affects both countries?
Yes. So one of the wonderful things about the US-Canada relationship is, of course, it's broad and deep. And that extends to science and science advice as well. When I was at the White House, I had contacts with my Canadian counterparts talking about how to incorporate science into policymaking needs that are spanning both countries. So one example that's already been discussed at this conference is Lake Erie and eutrophication, that is the increasing algal blooms that are happening in Lake Erie. And of course, that's a decision, policy decisions that have to be made both in Ohio and also the province of Ontario. So that's a great example of having that same science base on algal blooms benefiting both nations' science policy apparatus.
That's great. So this is your first time at the CSPC. What do you think so far, and what's the value of having these science policy conferences?
This has been a wonderful science policy conference. I'm a little bit jealous because my organization, AAAS, does a science policy conference in Washington, D.C. every year. And this is a grander scale, and it's more enthusiastic than the last few that I've been to in D.C. And I think the importance of it is just so that people from all sectors and from all over the nation, and indeed all over the world, can get together and talk about the science and policy issues that really affect us all. Issues like, how do you provide advice to science policymakers? How do you ensure that support for national science enterprises remains strong? And of course, how do you solve all the problems that we face in common as nations?
I think Madan and the volunteers are going to be really happy to hear that.
Oh, yes, yes.
So before we go, can you tell us where to find out more about you and your work online?
So my work right now at AAAS is to try to develop science policy projects, because AAAS has been around for 170 years, but we're always trying to do better at incorporating science into public policy, into incorporating science into education, etc. So I'm helping to develop a couple of new projects to provide scientific evidence more rapidly and more relevantly to policymakers. I'm also working on improving AAAS's efforts to advocate on behalf of the U.S. science and engineering enterprise. And I'm trying to strengthen AAAS and our members' ties to the international science and technology community. So it's been a rewarding time to be at AAAS.
These sound like super exciting projects. Well, thanks for being with us, and thanks for being at the CSPC.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, everyone.